Thank you, John. So I'm Manish Patel and my friend here, Chuong. So today we are going to talk about day-to-day challenges of substance data compliance. I would say this session is going to be a little bit of more collaborative. We would want to have some sort of interaction with audience here. So we'll have more time for that, but we'll go through some slides real quick. So from AEM member companies perspective, what do we do? You heard about 1,000 plus AEM members, and we collectively serve many markets with variety of product applications. All these product applications require different set of regulations and standards which we need to comply to. I'll go through few here, but definitely this is not the complete list of products we serve, just a snapshot here. But couple of things to mention here is the products which are on the on-highway application, passenger cars, requires us to comply to end-of-life vehicle directive as well as GATSL standard requirements, products which in the M1, N1 type of vehicle. However, the end-of-life vehicle directive is expanding its scope and probably would require us to comply heavy-duty vehicles as well and few other product applications on highway to comply to GATSL and end-of-life vehicle directive requirements. The products on the off-highway side would require us to comply to European directives like VROJ, battery directive, and REACH regulation. All these applications have some things in common, and regulations have some things common as well as some nuances, or maybe we could say differences in terms of how those regulations apply to this product. So we'll go through what are the key regulations these products are required to comply to from our industry perspective. Here you see these regulations are divided into 4 different subject areas, and majority of these regulations require us to understand what's in the product. And these regulations are intended to evaluate or require us to report on use of certain substances which are impacting environment as well as human health. So the intention here is to understand what's in the product and eliminate when possible, or eliminate based on the regulation sunset date or enforcement dates. Few examples here, this regulation ROS, which is a market access regulation, regulation, which restricts use of 10 substances. However, the regulation like REACH, it's requires us to report presence of candidate list substances, and we can continue to place the products on market. The requirement is to notify our customers that the product does have those substances. So these regulations differ in terms of its applicability and how agencies requires companies to report those. Some regulations like conflict minerals, it's not a restriction on use of certain substances, but it requires restrictions on how we source them, where we source them, because US feels that the substances which are mined in DRC or covered countries end up into supporting inhuman activities in those regions. So some regulations operate in a different perspective or different with a different set of requirements. You heard this morning Brian talking about some of the future requirements in terms of reducing greenhouse gas and reducing carbon footprint. We are seeing those requirements shaping into the regulations. Battery Modernization Directive is a classic example there, which requires companies to start reporting CO2 equivalent value or LCA of the battery. And the regulation requires us to provide that information under the battery label itself. And that's coming pretty fast, probably 2026 or 2027. But thing is, we require more information in terms of complying to this regulation. It's not going to be just what's in the product, but we would also need more information in terms of how we source, where we source, what's the logistics information, how much transportation it covers from a supplier's location to our location. So how we do all of this? What factors impact Cummins as well as our member companies in AEM and as well as to you being one of our few of our strategic suppliers here in the room. From a regulation standpoint or a compliance standpoint, there are certain factors on the governmental side. We've seen enormous growth in number of substances being added into the restriction list. The graph on the top left shows you a steep increase. We've seen six-fold increase in last 4 or 5 years. And probably we would see more. PFAS, GATSL is probably going to add another 1,200 substances into the list, maybe by this summer or by end of the year. So the list is going to go up. Second big factor from agency side is these regulations are not harmonized evenly. European directives requires European member states to transpose those directive requirements into the law and then implement those. An example there would be Waste Framework Directive and SCIP requirements. Not all member states have implemented those, which impacts the supply chain in terms of how we report, where we report, and adds up the complexities in terms of collecting and reporting the data to agencies. We do have some internal factors. It's not about always we work and transfer all these requirements to suppliers. Internally within companies, we got to have better tools, better systems to manage and collect and report supply chain information. We need to have a proper handoffs within the company because we are the subject matters here in the organization. We always don't have all the information internally related to the products, applications. Marketing team comes up with a new idea about launching the same product, picking up the product, do some variations and launch it into the other region. And all of a sudden, the product requires to comply to those regional requirements. So people within the organization don't understand when they launch a product from North America region to Europe region or from Europe to Brazil. So we need to better educate them. We need to have written down processes so that people in the organization understand and do their part. When we develop processes, we got to work upon identifying who does what, when, and how, because that's critical for execution of the process. Again, in terms of laying down the processes and making sure people understand process, it's not the only thing we need to focus on, because if we were to collect the data and report the data to our customers and agencies, we need to go beyond and work with supply base, and we need to have proper tools. Automotive industries have one of the best-in-class tool, IMDS, whereas off-highway industry, unfortunately, don't have a common set of tools. Every company, I've seen some of my customers asking me, data in Excel spreadsheet, or some of the customers asking me to submit data on their portal, a different cloud-based system. So how many different set of tools we would end up with? So we got to think through what tools, what capable tools we need to deploy so that our supply base is comfortable enough to use those. Consider the cost factors in terms of how it's going to impact the suppliers' investment. So those are the things we consider internally in terms of how that affects our data collection program. Now, when it comes to suppliers and customers, customers sometimes don't understand what they're asking for, and we got to have some sort of discussions with them in terms of why are you asking this. I would say, I'll give you an example. One of my customers a few years back asked me to provide a ROS compliance for a product, and the product was absolutely falling into the category of large-scale fixed installation. So we said, why do you need this product to be compliant to ROS? Let's come together on a call and understand what you need, why you need, and then we agreed upon to reach compliance information because that's something they would require too. So it's always important to understand what customer requires, come onto the same page, and then work towards that. And when it comes to suppliers, we've seen training and education is important. Not all suppliers are on the same page in terms of understanding and awareness to this regulation. So we provide a lot of training on our supplier portal so that supplier can go through. We do provide links to the various cloud-based tools and where they can go sign up for the training as well as do a self-learning there. And if they have more questions or concerns, then we also provide one-on-one support to them by bringing in some consultants so that they can complete the declaration requirement. So with that, I'm going to go into a detail of what high-level process we have implemented and then hand it over to Chuong to go through some slides. So from Cummins' perspective, we have so many products and we said we are not going to boil the ocean for current products. We have so many current products in market, but having said that, what do we do for new products? We don't want to launch new products without having enough compliance information. So for new products, we work pretty closely with purchasing and technical organization and supplier quality group. During the product development stage, right in the beginning, when people are talking about bills of materials or recipe for the product, we get in front of them, understand what the product bill of material is, who would be the prospective suppliers for new products, and reach them out upfront during the development process. While purchasing and supplier quality runs the actual development process, in back-end, compliance team works with suppliers to collect the data. Now with suppliers, we have a multiple set of tools which they can use to report back to Cummins. We have IMDS, CDX, bomb check, and emphasis spreadsheet. Each one of the tools, I would recommend you can go to the supplier.cummins.com and have more information about those. But each of these tools supports full materials disclosure declaration requirement. And then once you provide that information, our team will go through it, review it. Sometimes we go back and forth with suppliers, and once we have the acceptable declaration, we provide a confirmation to suppliers. And then on the supplier quality side, we modified the PPAP process. We added a section 19 to disclose materials compliance information. So what we expect from suppliers is to provide approval notification from the system So that supplier quality person who is running a PPAP with you would have tummy comfort to approve the PPAP. And that close loops the development process. So the thing what we want to enforce here on new product development is, unless and until we get this information, your PPAP won't get approved, and the program will get delayed, program won't pass. So that's the ultimate control we try to implement when it comes to collecting the material compliance information. So with that, I would let Chuong go through his few slides.
Thanks. Thanks, Manish. Yeah, I think for CNH Industrial, our process is very similar to what Cummins does, and using the PPAP process and things like that. And I just remember this morning Brian mentioned that he's gonna, supply chain is a big issue, and he wanted to hug a supply chain operation when he gets back in the office. What I do is I like to hug him and then ask him to get the data for me too. Because it is difficult, right? So our process is very, very similar, but I think our data system setup is much simpler. Maybe, Manish, I like to think simpler is harder to do, but basically it's just taking data, putting it in a CDX system that we use. But actually, I think the heart of this is also connecting internally the bill of materials, the purchasing information, and the PPAP system all together. I think that's also a key for a larger company, right? Because one of the things that we talked earlier this morning too, maybe tie back to Brian, is the life cycle assessment. I still remember when, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, when my boss asked me to do life cycle assessment, to lead a group. I went back to my desk and started Googling up what is LCA, And the things that you need there is the bill of material and the materials information. So really, this is foundation not just for substance regulation, but it is for life cycle assessment. You're going to need this information also. So that's something to think about as we grow in this area, what needs to do. But absolutely, that tying all that together, having the supplier going through our external system and tying in the internal system. Okay. I think now we're going to switch over to what challenges and lessons learned. And I want to start out saying that when we were asked to collaborate and talk about this, we did it on our own, right? We made a list on our own and said, let's meet. I set like an hour to talk. And within 5 minutes, we say, all these challenges are very similar. They're exactly the same. The slides we made were the same. So we actually just combined a few slides because they're all the same from companies. And I'm willing to bet that it's very similar to many others too. Do you want me to talk this one, or you want? Great. So we break it to the challenges and lessons learned here, right? So as you see, the trend is that the new regulations require more transparency, and then also the existing regulation is evolving, is changing. Substances are added, right? And the problem with that is that we need to get full materials disclosure to solve. Yes, we dance around, we try to get declaration for compliance and things like that, but it gets to the point where our suppliers doesn't want us to bug them a lot either. If they do it once, it's much better that way. We also felt that the thing that we had a list that our suppliers need to get. Cummins does, so will others. But so the things that we learned is that it's a lot easier. We say, we use the GATSO list, and a lot of suppliers are, oh, I get it, I know what you mean. So the common list of substances, it's a lot easier to talk through. And yeah, we need cooperation with suppliers. During the break, I saw one of our supplier, and we talked about, oh, how we are working together to get something done, because it's not just, you know, I like to say that I'm going to dictate everything for the suppliers to do, but it's a collaborative effort, because we know the whole supply chain is struggling, and we're all trying to do the right thing. It's just sometimes we don't have data, right? So I guess that's one area that we said that we learned, is that if we can go from the start, a clean slate, then our full material disclosure is probably the best thing for the industry if everyone is more transparent about it. You want to take over something?
Okay. So in terms of internal and external factor challenges, I think one of the key challenge what we faced a few years back within my company was a full commitment from leadership. I think that was, I would say, 10 years back, Josh, probably. Yeah, but later on, once we show them value that this is something we needed to do, we needed to invest in IT system, we needed to invest in people. In fact, we grew from 2 people organization to 16 people organization in, I would say, 6-7 years. So commitment from leadership is key, and probably you guys are doing the same thing in your organization. You may be at a different level, but what we think is investment in time, talent, treasure is something which is paramount to the success of substance data collection program in any company. Awareness and training, we never ever communicate more. It's always, by the time we train supply base for ROS, Waste Framework Directive and SKIP database came in. Now we talked about SKIP, we understood what we need from suppliers, supply base geared up to provide that information, PFAS or LCA. So constant education and training is key, and we are committed here to do that within AEM supply base. You heard this morning about the depth and breadth of supply chain. Compared to automotive and electronics industries, we have thousands of suppliers in our supply base, and raw material information in somewhere down in tier 11 or tier 12, so which is a key challenge. It's not just a challenge for us as a OEM or a tier 1 suppliers to OEM, but it's a challenge for even tier 5 or tier 6. So how do we incentivize there? How do we do a better job in terms of pulling that information from tier 12 or tier 13? So one of the key things what we started talking about in our company is evaluating the supplier performance. Every company does. Like people traditionally do evaluate supplier performance on cost, quality, delivery, but we recently started adding a factor on compliance information. How many parts my supplier gave me a full materials disclosure? Is it, I've requested 10 parts, did they give me 10 parts information or 2 parts information? Based on that, we rate them. In fact, the factor what we added on performance evaluation can go to -5 marks. If they don't provide information, you get a -5. Or if you get, so it ranges from -5 to +5. So that's that way we can drive certain behavior in supply base. We understand data confidentiality is one of the biggest challenge. Some of the suppliers would feel that my data is confidential and I don't want to share, or it could jeopardize my IP, or it could impact my business. But believe me, this data, whatever is being collected, it's used for its intended purpose. We use the data only for providing information to our customers and agencies. We are bound by non-disclosure agreements with all of our suppliers, and we don't use this information for any other purpose like dual sourcing or cost reduction. No, that's not the intent. So rest assured, we will have your confidentiality maintained into our systems and continue to follow our non-disclosure agreements. Having said that, for FMDs, we do allow you to have 10% confidential business information because that's something we've seen a great success in automotive industry. When they started collecting data, they have the same set of requirements, or I would say same allowance on CBI. And we thought that it works fine. It works really great. So we will have the same set of rules for our supply chain. However, the 10% confidential business information is something you got to constantly validate against newly added substance, because that's something we won't be able to do that on behalf of you, but you'll have to keep a watch on newly added substance, and as and when any of the substance appears on the restriction list, you got to change your data sheet. So that's the probably additional work you may end up doing if you have anything in the form of CBI. I think that's it from the challenges and lessons learned perspective. So these are the couple of questions what I want to leave here in the room. Do you guys see similar set of challenges? And if you have different set of challenges, what are the top 3 challenges you have faced, and how can we help you there to help us better?
This is the interactive part.
Yeah.
So this is the interactive part, right? We have a couple of options. We could have a little bit of discussion at our tables and then have each table, throw up one thing that they thought at their table would be good for this list. So why don't we try that? We'll take 3 minutes, discuss at your table what you have heard from Manish and Chuong, and what would you add to their list? What are they missing about top challenges? Okay, let's wrap it up. I'm going to come around to each table. We'll have a spokesman give us your top couple here. We're going to start with table number 1.
All right. I know, Manish, you mentioned getting management buy-in. I just didn't see it bolted on there, so that would be something just to make sure that's considered, that, not just within your organization, but that suppliers are also getting the support that they need internally to do what they need to do. Some suppliers might welcome a low score on their scorecard just to get the attention from their management. So I think that's good that that's included. The other thing was, we mentioned FMD, but as far as also making sure that exemptions are noted and tracked in that FMD information to kind of link what's up and coming with exemptions expiring or things that need to get extended, combining advocacy a little bit with the FMD data just to make sure that that's looked at.
Great.
That's a great point.
Anybody from this table want to be the spokesperson?
You're it. I'm in. So what was that?
Resources for small companies, incomplete understanding, resources and companies.
Okay, so just basically those two then. An incomplete understanding in the organization and incomplete resources to deal with it, both in terms of processes and tools and people.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a spokesperson from this table.
So I think the challenges that they saw were the same as what you outlined up there, but what I guess they would emphasize is the transparency through the supply chain and being able to transfer confidential IP up so that their data is protected up to you, where you can actually report to whatever regulated entity is out there asking the question. So emphasize, not necessarily new.
Yeah.
Okay, good job.
Probably that's one thing we didn't clearly wrote that, but that's addressed through capable tools, because managing the data transfer and maintaining the confidentiality is one of the key element of data collection tools. But we didn't. That's embedded under one other bullet, but we can clearly spell that out. Yep. Thank you.
I think one other challenge today is, and we heard a little bit about it earlier this morning, right now the need to onboard new suppliers in unprecedented numbers than we've seen before to get the parts and materials that are needed to complete the products that we need to supply. And the fact that we're doing that and then trying to get data from those folks, again, in a very quick basis to meet the supplier needs and the part limitations, poses another challenge to what was already in place.
We have a spokesman from this table.
So just a follow-up on that, probably. So it's, how do you think, how we can resolve that challenge? Would that be just more training, more awareness, or more time for data collection? What do you guys think?
How do you think more training?
Mentioned here.
Our table came up with the biggest problem we want to be clear is the variety of reporting tools and the consistency. So unless you have one set of requirements, it's very hard to train the whole supply chain.
So lack of internal resources to drive this more, right up there. So a lack of internal resources to drive these initiatives, and as mentioned, it's surprising how much that you needed to educate your suppliers.
So we had 4, some repeats, lot of lack of company management understanding of why this matters, why it's important. It's just not perceived as something that matters. Another one is you get lower in the supply chain and you've got a lot less leverage with your suppliers. You know, you might be buying 8 to 10 parts from somebody, and if you say it's got to have this compliance data, they might say, sorry, not interested. And that's been reinforced by COVID quite a bit. You know, prior to COVID, the discussion was about quality, compliance, and price. Now it's, oh my gosh, can you really get me this part I need? I'll take it whatever you can get it. And it's really hard to put conditions on something when it's a seller's market. The volume of tools, the different portals, the different solutions, the different formats that are being asked, and just the sheer volume. Folks saying, you know, I'm getting 100 requests a week for data in different formats, different tools, different questions. And the other one that I thought was really interesting was, I'm getting these requests at PPAP, and that's way too late. I've got to be finding out what my suppliers are putting into the products long before I'm trying to sell it to you. If I don't get asked until I'm done, I really don't have a chance to say, well, this isn't good, so let's go re-engineer it. It's just too late to do that.
A lot of the same items or issues were discussed at the table here, but another one was really defining the responsibility within your organization of who's responsible for what, because there's so many moving parts to this whole compliance arena and data collection. One example is when a new chemical is added, how is that, you know, put into the systems, especially if you're not using a system that's more manages that for you, right? Some of the systems will manage that, but who has all the internal responsibilities? Again, really defining that. There's always an issue with resources, right? We all can use more people, but really defining who you have and what their responsibility is, I think they felt was really important. And anybody have anything else to add or any additional ones? Okay.
All right. Yeah, our table was talking about very similar things that have already been mentioned. One thing that hasn't been mentioned was every tier you go down the supply chain, they have to start over, right? They have to start their own management process, have their own data collection, do their own training for their suppliers, and it's just that time, right? It becomes exponential. And I understand AEM put together a plan to try to have a centralized database to help prevent that, but there really isn't a one-size-fits-all out there. So that's what we see as our need. But we definitely agree with like the common data reporting. That's an issue. And then we did have a mention here that the raw materials for mining operations, it tends to get hard to really get it down to the ore that came out of the ground and keeping that together, right? A lot of things get mixed and matched and put in ships and sent to different countries, and that gets hard to track.
I think a lot of the comments we talked about have already been stated, but we can't stress enough that need to get to a common system because of the resources it takes for small to medium companies to try to pull together all this information and report it into various systems, and then oftentimes left with the result that just disappears into the ethos. And so there's lack of feedback and acknowledgement that we're all moving in the same direction together. So it's that I know there's a lot of talk within AEM about getting this to a common reporting system, and I think from certainly a component supplier standpoint, we would strongly support that.
Okay, great. Is there anybody we missed? All right, thanks for the feedback. That really helps, and we will be capturing that and making it available on the website. We have one more, hang on.
Just a couple comments. There was one individual that mentioned the difficulty in getting new suppliers kind of on board, and I think that goes into the process of hiring new suppliers or contracting with them. So just, suggestion, have that be part of your evaluation or part of your purchase order, requirements, things like that, that suppliers are aware what the requirement is up front. Maybe, show documentation that they've been trained in whatever the system is that's being used, and that way they know what they're in for right from the start. And then the question about, how are we tracking new chemicals? And I think that having the common tool is going to be helpful so that it's automatic. Anything we can do that's automatic, having those substances be added within that common tool as they become, as that need becomes, required, then it's already there.
Anything that does the work for you and not create more.
Say something. John, can I say something too? There's a lot of good things that came out of this, but if I could come up with one word that kind of describe a lot of those things is clear communication. Oh, that's two words, sorry. Sorry. But it is true, like someone mentioned, don't wait till PPAP. Well, you have to have a clear communication that you can give us the data before PPAP. PPAP is just the final gate. And clear policies, communication throughout the supply chain. Even tools, right? You said common tools. Those are communication between tools. So it's just a nice common thing is clear communication throughout all the roles, different roles. So
I think I would add one more comment there on new supplier onboarding. I think from my perspective, getting new supplier buy-in to provide full materials disclosure is probably easy task than getting a current existing supplier to provide you a full materials disclosure. Because for current suppliers, we hear a lot of times, hey, I'm supplying this part since 1990 or early 2000. Why do you need this information now? Or even if we say that, okay, we need it now, I would need X dollars increase. So many headwinds for current product parts or with current product supplier. For new suppliers, you got to have those things clearly spelled out upfront in RFQ or a business award process, whatever, and get the buy-in right away. I mean, if supplier says, I can't do this, then you don't get a business. So, and if you get a buy-in, then supplier later on can't say no to that. So, I think that's just my perspective, but you could have a different opinion there.
Thank you. I think we have a couple of questions to put up for the group. So if you wouldn't mind texting your answers to these questions. Yep.
You guys.
Thank you.